Congratulations, everyone. It looks like we've made it to Friday, yet again. As a treat, it looks like we get more cozy horror. With me, Dr. Plague. Have a seat, get comfortable, as we get 5 more great stories from 5 great writers. Today's theme is strange jobs. And I think I've found some pretty strange jobs for you to speculate over. Starting off, we have a story from 10 Minute Horror about an antique relic that's gone by the wayside, the video store. So let's hear about how they worked at a video store in the 90s.
I'd worked there for 2 years and loved it. There were all kinds of deals and discounts for employees, and we had a big popcorn machine like you see in the movie theaters, free for anyone who wanted a bag. We had a large, repeat customer base of regulars that always looked for recommendations, which we were thrilled to give. 2 of us would close up at the end of the night, with one typically being a guy. Yet somehow on that Sunday, it ended up being 2 girls. I was pretty tired from a bad night of sleep, and not feeling real great, so I was just trying to get to the end of the shift. My coworker Michelle's boyfriend came by about an hour before closing, and went through the aisles repeatedly, trying to kill time. Finally, I told her she could take off, and I'd close up by myself. It was a Sunday, so we'd be closing at 8, which was half an hour away, and the store had been quiet all day, so I wasn't expecting a big rush. A few minutes after they left, I decided to start cleaning up, which meant going around and collecting the garbage bags from all the bins around the store. The store itself was huge, with dozens of 5-foot-high rows of VHS tapes and a large load-bearing pillar decorated with prop characters. There were TVs playing new releases of all kinds. As I walked out from behind the desk to start with the garbage bins, I heard the familiar ding sound come from the front door. It seemed we had a late customer. I went back behind the desk and put another VHS in the automatic tape rewinder. Those things were great. As the tape rewound, I tried to get a better look at who had come in, but they'd turned down the first aisle, horror, and the shelves and one of the large pillars blocked my view. I waited for them to move out from behind the pillar, but they stayed there. Then the tape popped up in the rewinder, and I let out an embarrassing gasp. I kind of winced at myself as I replaced the tape in the plastic sleeve. I set another tape to rewind and decided to start collecting the garbage near the front. When I got up to the horror aisle, the customer was gone. The store was quiet. I walked down the aisle and turned to the right where I could see down 2 more rows. There was no one. I went down another row and walked out to the main aisle leading to the desk, and came face to face with the customer. He was a man in his mid-20s, about 6 feet tall. He had long jet black hair and was dressed all in black. He had on a dirty leather jacket and wore chains with pentagrams and goat skulls. The Satanist look wasn't exactly intimidating back then, as it kind of blended in with the punk crowd in the area. I couldn't tell which side this guy was on, but there was something behind his eyes that made me feel cold. He stared at me, long and hard. It was the most uncomfortable I'd ever been. Neither of us spoke, and for a moment I thought he was going to rush me. Then the tape rewinder popped up and killed the tension. I let out a nervous laugh, and he smiled at me like he'd known me my whole life. "Good evening," he said, and walked past me. I croaked out, "You too," as I heard the front door open and close in that familiar jingle. I turned and saw the man outside, walking off towards his car at the far end of the parking lot. It was 7:45, so I decided to shut the store down early. The man left a lasting impression, and I called my boyfriend and told him to be there at 8 to pick me up. I locked the front door and felt a lot better. I picked up all the garbage and put it away. Then I went back to the front desk to empty the till, and that's when I saw something on the counter. It was a VHS tape in a plastic container. The man must have returned it. Only, it wasn't one of ours. It had the same kind of clear plastic holder we used, but it didn't have a sleeve or a jacket from our store. The tape inside it had a sticker on it with a name written on it. It said, Melissa. That's my name. The tape wasn't rewound. It was as far to the right as it could get, like it had been watched to the very end. My hands were shaking, but I managed to put the tape in the rewinder. It was an automatic reaction. I wasn't even sure I wanted to watch the tape. As it rewound, I argued with myself over what to do. I thought about not watching it, but knew it would eat away at me if I didn't. I thought about waiting for my boyfriend and watching it with him, but he was a hothead, and if it was something bad, I could see him going postal. I decided to watch it by myself in the back office. My finger had hovered over the play button, but eventually I pressed it. The tape started with static, then an image took over. It was a grainy handheld camera, held by someone in the driver's seat of a car that was moving. The holder of the camera was trying to keep it steady while they drove. After several seconds, the available hand turned the steering wheel, and I caught a glimpse of something out of the windshield that I recognized. It was the glowing sign above our store, South Coast Videos, in neon. I watched the car pull into the back end of the parking lot, right where the man had been going earlier. The camera pointed at the front entrance of the video store, and waited. A family car entered the parking lot. My boyfriend. It pulled up in front of the store, and I watched myself kiss him as I got in. The video cut to footage from a new day and another work drop-off, this time by my parents. It showed another and another, over a dozen cuts of me getting out of the car and going into the store. Then the video showed me coming out, going into whichever car was picking me up that night and driving off. In the video, I recognized the pants I was wearing from the previous day and realized I was watching footage from last night. I watched myself get into my parents' car and drive away. This time, the camera followed. The driver was tailing us, and it stuck with us all the way home. I watched my parents' car pull into our driveway. The camera focused on our house, number 42, and then cut to black. For a moment I thought that was it, but the tape had more. A new image flickered on. It said it was just after 3 a.m. It was from inside the car again, and it was pointing at my house. The driver's side door opened and the camera got out. It moved across the street and towards the side of the house. The camera pointed in through the window along the side as it moved towards the backyard. I saw the living room, the dining room. They were both dark and empty. At the back door, there was a fumbling and jangling before a small metal tool was brought out and jammed into the lock. It was twisted, and the door popped open. My heart went from beating 1,000,000 times per second to not at all. The man was inside my house. The camera switched to the grainy night vision and moved through the empty kitchen, and entered the living room and looked at photos hanging on the walls and books stacked on the shelves. It took the whole room in. Then it turned to the staircase that led up to the bedroom. The camera moved up the stairs quietly and reached the second floor. I pressed stop on the VCR. I wasn't sure I wanted to continue. I reconsidered getting my boyfriend and asking him to watch and tell me what had happened. But I had to know. I pressed play. The tape began with the camera looking left, then right down the hallway. I knew that to the right was my younger brother and sister's room, and to the left was the bathroom, my parents' room, and mine at the far end. The camera started left, focusing on the door at the end of the hallway. My door. The camera moved past the bathroom and my parents' room without slowing. Came to stop on my door. A hand reached out and turned the knob. It opened a crack, and a hand slipped in further, bringing the camera with it. My bedroom door closed with the man on the inside. The camera found my bed, and there I was, sound asleep. My thumb hovered over the stop button on the VCR, ready to end whatever it was about to see before it traumatized me for life. The camera was placed on my desk, facing the bed. The man from the store came into view. He carried a rag in his hand. I watched him creep up onto the bed, easing himself across it until he was over the top of me. Then he pressed the rag down over my face. My body trembled and shook and then went still. I pressed stop and threw up in the garbage bin beside the TV. Watching the attack, I'd gotten a horrible, familiar feeling, like a forgotten memory, reappearing after being lost. I took a few minutes, collecting myself, before deciding once again that whatever happened to me on that tape, I needed to know. I pressed play again, and there was the image of my unconscious body in my bed, being straddled by a black-clothed goth psychopath. The man pulled the rag away from my face. He pulled my shirt up over my head, then reached around to the back of his pants. He pulled out a knife with a ceremonial handle and dragged it down the center of my chest without drawing a drop of blood. Then he put the blade to the palm of his left hand and cut. He winced at the pain, but then resheathed the knife and dabbed his right finger and the blood of his palm. The man used the blood to draw all over my stomach and chest. He made strange markings on my skin, taking his time while he did so. Then he finished and lit a candle. He held it with his right hand and put his bloody left hand on my stomach. I could hear him on the tape, speaking quietly, but couldn't make out what he was saying. It sounded like hushed chanting or praying. As he went on, my back began to arch upward and lift off the bed. My mouth opened and I held one long, continuous gasp for what felt like minutes. Then the man stopped, and so did my gasp. I fell limply back to the bed, and the candle blew out. After a moment, the man got up and cleaned the blood off my stomach, using a towel he'd brought. He grabbed the camera from the desk and crept out of my room. Everything went hazy after that. I'd sweated through all my clothes, my whole body trembling, but I still watched the camera sneak back out my house and to his car. The video pulled something back in my memories, a strange, frightening disturbance in the night, only brief flashes and lengths and dismissed as a bad dream. But I had a horrible migraine when I woke up. It all made sense. I showed the video to my boyfriend and he freaked out. We called the police and gave them every bit of evidence there was. But the man was never found. That was years ago, and the only reason I'm thinking about it now is because I'm pregnant. There are strange markings appearing on my growing belly that look a lot like the ones the man drew in his own blood.
Really makes me nostalgic for the days I could just pop into the old Blockbuster for something cool to watch. I like Netflix, but it's taken the soul out of the experience in a lot of ways. Moving on, we have a different sort of job, brought to us by Positively 6th Street. We have a story about an EMT who resuscitated his first patient.
One of the first things my EMS cert teacher told me was that the touchiness would pass. That one day I'd be slipping IV needles into arms as easily as I floss between my teeth. Yet, I was 2 weeks into my first full-time ambulance gig, and I was still shaking between calls. The 3-story inferno raging downtown didn't help, but that's not where me and my partner Tom were heading. Prior to this whole situation, our night was quiet, mostly dealing with confused dementia patients or burgeoning schizophrenics. The MO is either to find their medicine or transport them to the hospital. Most of our calls were like that, low stakes, right in my comfort zone. But now we were dispatched to a Priority 2 emergency, the kind of call that necessitates the whole lights and siren deal. Someone called in a possible self-harm situation involving one of their neighbors. Serious stuff, but I had Tom with me. He was a vet, a former cop, and I was always in his steady hands. The issue was that the downtown inferno had really messed traffic up for 2 solid miles in front and behind us. We hadn't moved more than 10 yards in about 5 minutes, and even though it was protocol to have a police response as well, we were as close to the front as it got. Hell, we were the front line at that point. Another minute passed in gridlock before Tom finally blurted out, "You gotta go alone." And there was really no other way. Abandoning the ambulance and blocking further fire trucks wasn't an option. Solo responses were rare, sure, but it was necessary in desperate circumstances like this. I knew it was coming, but it was the last thing I wanted to hear. Don't get me wrong, I wanted to go. Deep in my heart, I would be willing to lay my life down for a patient. I wanted so badly to be that type of cool, methodical mind that entered an emergency situation and eased their patient back from the brink. It just hadn't come to me yet. Tom saw it. I'm sure if seconds weren't the difference between life and death, he would have given me 5 minutes for a pep talk. For now, though, all he could do was pat my shoulder and smirk. "Knock 'em alive, kid." So out I went, squeezing myself between the bumper-to-bumper traffic until I found myself on the correct cross street. There's something horrifying in the minutes between their call and your arrival. The feeling creeps in while you're slipping over broken sidewalks and homeless tents, realizing you're the beginning and the end of their recovery. It all comes down to you, the practitioner. To be blunt, you're God for those few minutes, and God was having a pretty bad time gaining entry. Someone buzzed me in, but of course, apartment 13B was locked. Our response time was already woefully long, so waiting for police to break it down was not an option. I went to town using my bump key, prying it open less with finesse and more with raw, frantic energy. The door opened in near complete darkness. I saw candles around the corner and the end of the hall, but a whole lot of unknown was between me and there. Light switches were oddly dead, so my flashlight had to guide my feet. From the little I could see, it was a well-lived-in apartment. At least 2 generations had sunk their essence into the carpet. That's when the smell hit. It was familiar, the scent of a man. No, not exactly, no. It was like my granddad's musk. I hadn't smelled it since I was in his lap as a kid, but the recall was instantaneous. It made me feel oddly safe, which lasted only a few seconds, considering what I would soon see. Around the corner, there was a metric ton of candles in the living room. Every surface was covered with them. Weirdly, the wax was melting from every kind of receptacle except a candle jar. Bowls, mugs, shot glasses. The source of the musk, no doubt. They cast the entire room in a homemade devilish glow. They lit the way to the girl I would come to know as Ellie. She had wrapped herself up in the corner, laying motionless. Baggy sweats and a white tee hid her frailty at a glance. I rushed to her, set her on her back, and began to triage. First was the bruising on her neck. It was fresh, must have tried some sort of strangulation, but it wasn't what did her in, so I quickly moved on. Blood caked her white t-shirt. I followed it to her wrists. They were messy slashes, but they didn't look deep enough to do real harm. That's when I noticed the culprit of my light switch woes. Sloppily wound duct tape attached a fork to her hand, just a foot away from the charred-out power outlet. Christ, she'd electrocuted herself. Full cardiac arrest. She could have died in the seconds it took me to triage. My hand found position and began compressions. I regained some confidence as I found my rhythm, laying the foundation of the AED to work its magic. The repetitiveness gave me my first moment to take Ellie in. She was young, maybe even younger than my 19-year-old sister. Her being in this position seemed so wrong. I could see this face getting drunk at a college party, waiting tables at a diner in town, but not here. I thought about the second chance I wanted to give her as I continued compressions. That's when the room started to feel warm. The candle scent now got a bit clearer. It wasn't the manly musk of someone's grandfather. It was an animalistic scent. Dried blood and mange. Something that activated a long-buried fight-or-flight instinct in my primitive genes. I had to keep on with my compressions, though. Even if I had lost track of time, I might have been way short of 2 minutes when I decided to stop CPR and pick up the AED. It wasn't until I'd unzipped the bag that I realized this was the first time I'd used the AED in the field. I'd learned the ins and outs, tested it on course dummies, and seen others use it, but I'd never actually been tasked to use it in the field. I pulled up her shirt and applied the wire pads, again feeling a warmth that sent a bead of sweat down my neck. Finally, me, the naive idiot, decided to turn it on. The flames of the candle array now burned twice as bright. They licked high enough to start to uncover some of the shadows against the wall, revealing scraggy-looking wallpaper. No time to admire the settings, though. I waited patiently as the AED robotically counted down and administered the first shock. It picked up heartbeat rhythm automatically, but I still used my fingers to feel her absent pulse directly. It remained still. No response. Desperate, I repositioned my fingers as I checked for a pulse, and I didn't find one. Of that I was supremely confident. My fingers wiped some of the blood from her wrist as I did. Only now did I decide her cuts weren't at all random. They, in fact, cut out symbols in her flesh. A star. No, that was a pentagram. But the affirmative boop of the AED took my mind off the task. It rejiggered her heartbeat, automatically suspending its shocks. Any weirdness I felt came secondary to my resumed chest compressions. Resuscitation, especially with a faint heartbeat like this, always felt to me like pulling someone from quicksand. You're shoulder deep, clinging to a couple of fingers, hanging onto that little grip as you try to extract the entire person. If you're good, that little grip's all you need. I pumped with that metaphor in my mind's eye, laser focused on my goal. For 15 seconds, I felt like the ideal practitioner I dreamed of being, reeling my patient back from the brink. Until, I shit you not, the flames gained a life of their own. At first I thought it was just the ones directly in front of me, but as I spun I realized it animated every live flame, each one dancing its way towards the ceiling, causing the receptacles to bubble over with wax. You spend a lifetime watching flames move randomly, flicking with the wind, and I promise you their sudden conscious movement will rattle you to your depths. A full red light illuminated what I now realized wasn't wallpaper. It was blood-inked writing, overlapping scrawls of mantras over every wall and even possibly the ceiling. I imagined her crawling like a spider as she wrote, "Praise be all glory to the true one, may his new kingdom reign." Then finally the one spanning the entire main room. "May my blood serve as sacrifice." I suddenly felt like an interloper in a place I should not be, intruding on an ancient ritual. Whatever had its grip on her seemed to be in the room with me now. The flames kept up their height so I could take it all in, wax spilling over onto the floor. Looking back now, I think it was offering me a chance to reconsider what I was doing. It had its claim on her, but as her practitioner, I felt I had an equal claim. I resumed compressions, faster now, desperate to get her back as fast as possible. The flames swirled, seeming enraged by this development, and not letting me forget it. Yet somehow I was able to separate my technique from my panic-ridden nerves, keeping a tight rhythm for almost a minute before the girl finally snapped upright. The flames dissipated in an instant, down to tiny weak flickers. Her eyes were shut at first, like she was still within a blissful dream. Then her eyes opened to what she seemed to clearly think was a nightmare. Where'd he go? Where is he? She seemed taken by complete surprise, grounding herself back in reality as she pawed at herself. My practiced lines of patient comfort only enraged her. You have to let me get back. With rabid panic, she started to grab at her wrists, but soon realized it wasn't the most economic method of return. I finally regained my composure just as I saw her eyes meet the burned outlet. I screamed and grabbed at her leg, but her hand stretched to reach it. It connected, but unfortunately, it seemed she'd blown that out completely the last time. No shock was administered. Ellie kicked me off and stood, searching for a weapon, for a way out. It gave me a second to reason with her, person to person. That practiced BS now scared right out of me, but she responded with a level-headed reason that made it feel almost like she was speaking in my best interest. You don't understand. I'm the last one. He needs me. She raced across the room to the dresser, rifling through the top drawer. I went to pull her off when she struck me hard across the face. It wasn't a punch to harm as much as a utility swipe, keeping me away as economically as possible. I was a few feet away when she pulled the knife from the drawer. There wasn't any fanfare, no waiting to see the horrified look on my face. She just sliced it as fast as she possibly could. I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 good hacks before Tom rushed in to tackle her. In one swoop, he was able to pin her while cleanly plucking the blade from her grip. Blood pooled as he steadied her flailing arms with ease, getting the one she had sliced into the open. You okay? Once we had established that I was at least physically unharmed, I got back to work wrapping her wrist, stopping the brunt of the blood flow. Tom reinstated order to my rapidly deteriorating nightmare. As much as she wailed and cried in that first minute, she settled completely as she was padded up and restrained for transport. Her dead eyes followed me back and forth across the room as I spoke to the police officers that had arrived, burned into my scalp even when I turned around. She seemed to have come to a realization, something that set her at complete peace even here in the reality she had been forced back into. Stupid me, I reasoned that maybe I'd given her a new lease on life, something she would cherish. Stupid. That was a week ago. There were 5 total ritual suicides that night, aside from Ellie. All were successful. The first was a young artist who burned herself on a pyre, setting her warehouse studio aflame. That was the inferno that caught Tom and I in the traffic heap. My first patient died 2 days later. He was a 12-year-old boy suffering from asphyxia after eating some mislabeled Chinese food. An EpiPen was administered by his mom, but it wasn't enough. We arrived in time and got the epinephrine IV in. However, his heart responded in a bizarre fashion. It began to rapidly slow with the increasing dose. He wasn't just dying, it was like I was killing him. He died so fast it took his mom 2 minutes to realize. The longest 2 minutes of my life. 1 is a fluke, but 6 are a pattern. 5 more of my patients would die, some with completely non-life-threatening conditions. My supervisor comforted me after the first, but things darkened quickly from there. Despite the fact that I was investigated and could not have done anything different, I was suspended indefinitely. It took me almost a week to find Ellie. From the hospital, they bounced her between a few psych wards until landing her at one for, shall we say, more intense cases. Despite this, their windows were not barred, just thick and secured tight with latches. Something told me hers would be unlocked. It was. She's sleeping. Been this way for the last hour. I've gripped and released the knife in my pocket 100 times over, though.
Kinda makes me glad I got out of the medical trade. Though, some of those stories from the Kashmir reception desk are almost biographical. Though, with a few less ghosts, I suppose. Moving on, we have a tale from a Disney park, brought to us by our good friend, J Group. Let's hear a little about Disney's dark secrets.
Teddy and I had been working at Disney for years. The two of us had seen hundreds, if not thousands, of young cast members come and go, heading off to college or to better jobs and brighter futures. Meanwhile, the two of us stuck around and became a running joke to some of the younger employees. Since we were never promoted to management, that is. Most of the lower-level members were young, in their early 20s or late teens, and to them, it was just a part-time gig, a way to raise money for college or to pass a bit of time until their real lives and careers began. But Teddy and I were lifers, and some would say losers, although I would never attach that label to myself willingly. I'd heard it whispered enough times to know that it was what other people thought of us. We'd both been there for nearly 2 decades, and had worked on pretty much every single attraction, but had never been deemed responsible enough to be promoted to supervisor status. Over all that time, I found a lot of secrets about the place. Some things that are known to the public, but also some revelations that aren't talked about anywhere. Did you know that cast members who work as mascots have to wear communal underwear? Yeah, that's right. They all share the same underoos, and they get washed in between uses. At least, in theory. Who knows what pervert came up with that idea? Or how about the fact the skeleton on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride was originally constructed out of real bones? Despite the park's insistence that all the bones were removed, a few still remain. Management lost track of which were real and which were fake, and they just left the real ones in there along with the imposters. But when you're up close, it's easy to tell them apart. The real ones are a little more yellow, and they're heavier than the plaster ones. There are plenty of morbid secrets like that. People scatter the ashes of their deceased loved ones in the park so frequently, we actually have a not-so-subtle code name for it. A white powder alert. The Haunted Mansion and the Pirates of the Caribbean are the most common places, but it's done all over, and who knows how often people get away with it without even being noticed. Code 101 means a ride is temporarily shut down, while Code V, or a protein spill, means that someone has vomited on a ride and it needs to be cleaned up. Those spills are often the cause of ride shutdowns, rather than mechanical issues. Oh, and if you hear yourself or someone else being referred to as a treasured guest, it doesn't mean you're a VIP. It's actually our code word for saying you're being an asshole. There are stories of ghosts, some told by people who never believed in such things before witnessing them in the park. The specter of Walt Disney himself has been seen a couple of times, outside Sleeping Beauty's castle, just on the other side of the drawbridge. Or sometimes he's seen at night, just outside his old apartment on Main Street, where occasionally you might smell a whiff of cigarette smoke, despite the fact that such things are banned inside the park. Walt and his family once lived there, so they could spy on visitors and listen to their opinion on the park. They would eavesdrop on their conversations from the second-floor apartment, just above the street level. George, a dead electrician, supposedly haunts the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and every morning, cast members must call out, "Good morning, George," at the start of the day, Otherwise, the ride will mysteriously have issues all day long. Unexpected shutdowns and other strange things often occur if George isn't given his proper morning greeting. And have you heard about the animatronics and It's a Small World running all night long? Yep, those rumors are true too. In fact, quite a few of the lifelike robots stay in motion 24/7, even throughout the lockdown and park shutdowns a couple of years back. If you ask the management about it, they'll tell you it's because the attractions are cheaper to maintain that way. They break down less frequently if they're in constant motion. That's the excuse we get anyway. But I've come to realize there might be far more terrifying reasons for this. Something so disturbing and twisted that I wouldn't have thought it was possible if I hadn't witnessed it for myself. Teddy and I were on our lunch break when we found the storage room. We were looking for somewhere a little more private since Teddy had brought a bit of homemade greenery and his favorite piece of glassware that day. The park has miles and miles of tunnels crisscrossing beneath it, and Teddy and I had explored most of the labyrinth over our years of service. Like everything else in the park, there was a stupid nickname for these underground tunnels. They had been dubbed utilidors by some management types in the distant past. Most of the cast members just called them the tunnels, and they were so vast we often used golf carts to get from one end of them to the other. There were odd dead ends at some of the tunnels that seemed to intentionally lead to nowhere. We were currently in one such useless utilidor when we noticed an odd-looking door which appeared to be at least half a century old, if not more. It had a rusted placard hanging over its surface which read, "Obsolete Animatronic Storage." "Hey, didn't there used to be a vending machine there?" Teddy asked. "Who cares? Let's see if it opens. We've only got 20 minutes left," I said, looking at the time on my cell phone. The doorknob turned in my hand, and the two of us went inside. I looked for a light switch on the wall to my right, but I didn't find one. It was pitch black and impossible to see anything. Using the flashlight on my phone, I cast a beam of light around the room, trying to see what kind of space we were in. There were people-shaped forms all around us, draped in tarps and tablecloths. The room was as long as a football field, but it was narrow, only about 15 feet across. "Creepy," Teddy said, taking the words right out of my mouth. Well, I guess it did say this was animatronic storage. This must be really old. He wandered away from the door, and it clicked shut behind him. Something about that made me nervous, but I had ignored the feeling. The door had been unlocked, and that meant we'd be able to get out again. Still, I reached for the knob to check it. My hand was about to touch the polished brass when Teddy called out, making me jump. "Whoa! Check this out!" he said, sounding excited. I left the door, turning around to see what he was looking at. He had his cell phone light on as well, and was lifting up one of the tarps to look at what was underneath. "Man, this thing's freaky looking." He pulled the tarp away, and I saw what he meant. The thing hidden beneath was very creepy. It had the goateed face of a young man, but the ears and nubby horns of a goat, looking far too real. Its lower half looked like it also belonged to a goat. The thing reminded me of a satyr, those drunken, lustful half-goat gods from Greek mythology. I tried to figure out why it was making me feel so uneasy, and realized it was the eyes. They were too lifelike, far more real than the animatronics out in the park, and the look of the skin, the way it reflected the light and anything about it, it looked like it was a real creature. More likely, a man had been sewn to the body of a goat in a very thorough way, making the seams blend together perfectly. Teddy was already moving on to the next one, looking under another tarp. He left me alone with this one, and I looked back down at it as I let go of the cover and let it fall across its face again. Flinching backwards, I nearly screamed, as I could have sworn the eyes of the thing were looking at me, just as I dropped the tarp over its face. My heart was beating fast, and I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, or that the eyes had been looking up that way the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. "We need to go," I heard myself say, but Teddy wasn't listening. "Holy crap! This one's even more jacked up. Dude, you gotta check this out." I opened my mouth to say, "No, let's get out of here." But my words caught in my throat. The satyr creature under the tarp was clearly moving now. Its head was still draped in the plastic sheet, but I could see it turning to look at me, as if its gaze could penetrate through the tarp. "Dude, come check this out," Teddy was yelling, pulling the next sheet off and dropping it to the floor. I saw what he was referring to, my eyes drawn to it despite the terror of the draped creature just in front of me. This one was tall, standing nearly 10 feet. It had one large eye instead of two. Man, whoever made these things was tripping on acid or something. Look at this thing. It looks like they jacked an eye from an elephant and stuffed it in some dude's forehead. I think they were trying to make a cyclops. I could barely hear him, as now the thing in front of me wasn't the only figure in the room which was moving. To my left, the entire row of covered forms were beginning to stretch and turn as they woke up from whatever sleep they had been in. Some were tall, some were short, like the satyr thing on my right, but all of them were alive. I realized it was very cold all of a sudden, and realized I could see my breath steaming out in the air. A compressor groaned to life, and I saw a nearby vent cough out a frosty plume as if something had been jammed or broken and was suddenly operating again. The temperature in the room began to plummet, and a second later, I was freezing cold, the rushing air chilling the back of my neck. Finally, I was shocked out of my stupor and managed to get a word out. "Teddy," I croaked, but too late. The giant cyclops hand shot out and grabbed my friend by the throat. It lifted him up into the air while his legs kicked and his arms thrashed, trying to break its grip. He was choking and sputtering, flailing madly as he tried to free himself. The cyclops firmly held him by the throat, and I heard the sound of cartilage and bones being crushed. His spine popped, and his head bent back at an impossible angle, his skull lolling backwards like a broken Pez dispenser. And then the giant dropped him to the concrete floor of the room, and his foam clattered and turned over, casting half the room in darkness again. I backed away, feeling like I was moving in slow motion, but unable to go any quicker. Reaching back for the doorknob, it felt like the tunnel had grown by 100 feet. It was further away than it could possibly have ever been. I kept backing up, taking slow, quiet steps. The figures were moving towards me, all of them closing the gap and slowly walking in my direction. Their forms were covered, draped in bed sheets and tarps and tablecloths, as if this place had been thrown together in a hurry, hastily constructed to house these possessed animatronics or whatever these creatures were. Cold air was filling the room, making it even more difficult to move. My skin felt like it was being stabbed with pins and needles, the freezing wind going right through my summer clothes. There was a sound of tearing flesh and blood being spilled. I looked to see several of the monsters were tearing the skin from Teddy's face, peeling it from his bones with some difficulty, like trying to open an underripe orange. The worst part was, it looked like he was still alive. He was opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, his eyes wide open as if he'd be screaming if he were capable of it. I tried to tear my eyes away from it, but I couldn't. I found myself staring at him as they took the flesh off his face. I backed up hard into something and realized it was the door. In the darkness, I felt for the doorknob behind me, but I couldn't find it. The creatures were still moving towards me, all of their faces covered by sheets except for the massive cyclops that had killed my friend. Its one huge eye was fixed on me, and as it moved in lockstep with the other creatures, they all seemed to share one hive mind. As they approached, a few stepped on each other's coverings, tearing them away and revealing their hideous faces. I saw a woman's upper body sewn onto the legs of a deer, and a man with the hindquarters of a bull, their faces full of mute anger. My hand groped for the doorknob desperately, and after several long moments, it settled on the smooth brass. It was so cold, almost frozen. I spun around, expecting the doorknob to turn easily, but this time it was stuck. I couldn't tell if it was locked or frozen solid, but either way it wouldn't budge. Feeling like there would be icy hands around my throat at any second, I was too terrified to turn around. I heard the sound of shuffling feet moving closer, the icy wind blowing through my clothes and raising goosebumps on my skin. I began pounding against the door with my fists, banging on it as hard as I could as I screamed for help, pleading for someone to save me. "Help! Help! Open the door!" I yelled at the top of my lungs. The corridor we had entered was a dead end, rarely used by anyone. Of course, this door would be locked from the inside, I thought to myself. Who would offer an escape to these animatronic demons? If they had ever been imbued with any form of failsafe, it was long ago out of commission and useless. These creatures had no mercy and no respect for human life. They wanted blood and flesh and meat to create more of themselves, to raise an army of undead robotic soldiers. Manic thoughts were racing through my head as I tried to think of another way out. There had to be something, some other way out. I turned around, hoping for some other exit to present itself, but instead I just saw hundreds of shrouded forms stepping closer and closer until they were just a few feet away. A gurgling, wheezing sound could be heard from behind them, and I realized it was the labored breathing of Teddy slowly dying. If I didn't get out of here, I'd be next. With one desperate move, I kicked out towards the head of the nearest shrouded figure. It was the satyr. My foot connected with his face, and as it did, the entire crowd fell back a step, as if hurting one of them would hurt all of them. I lashed out with another blow, punching it in the gut, and the crowd took another wounded step backward. I used the newfound space to my advantage and took a short running start towards the door. Kicking it hard with my boot, I connected squarely with the spot behind the doorknob. It rattled in the frame, but it didn't budge. Taking a quick look back over my shoulder, I saw the crowd of animatronic creatures were coming at me again with renewed anger. They looked furious at me for assaulting one of them, and apparently I had injured it. The satyr was slumped forward, its joints making creaky noises as it made its way towards me, its movements jerky and disorganized. I kicked the door again, harder this time, using every ounce of force I could muster. I heard something splinter and break, but it still wouldn't budge. Icy hands grabbed my throat from behind, and I threw an elbow backward to try to break free. It connected with whatever had grabbed me, and it didn't let go. Instead, its grip tightened, choking and squeezing my throat until I couldn't breathe. I let out another strangled cry for help, but no sound came out this time. The grip on my windpipe was making it impossible to call out. My feet were going numb from the cold, which seemed to have intensified even more somehow. I hadn't thought it was possible to feel any colder, but I realized that whoever was controlling the temperature of this place was doing this on purpose. These things didn't like the cold, and it put them in a state of hibernation. For some reason, this place had been almost room temperature when we entered, bringing these creatures back to life. With one more desperate effort, I lifted my leg and kicked as hard as I could, my heel connecting with the door just beside the latch. Something shattered and broke loudly, and the door swung open on its hinges. The momentum brought me forward, and I found myself tumbling back into the corridor. Whatever had grabbed hold of me came with me, the icy hand still around my neck. As I landed, the thing's fingers broke off like icicles, shattering on impact. The shrouded creature was writhing on the floor, looking as if it wanted to get up and chase me, but wasn't quite capable of it yet. It was still too cold. I stumbled to my feet and ran from there, not really thinking about my mistake until I was far past that point. When it occurred to me what I had done, it was too late. I had let those things out. I'd opened the door and freed them, and I had allowed the warm air inside so they could come back to life and escape. I was too terrified to stay in the park. I went home immediately without saying a word to anyone, then called my boss and told him I was sick with a stomach flu. I apologized, saying I'd been throwing up in the bathroom and didn't want to cause a code V while on stage. He told me that was okay, since he knew I was a dedicated employee, a trusted cast member who had been with the park for years. But he did ask if I'd seen Teddy, and I had to lie and tell him I hadn't. I'm supposed to go back to work tomorrow, for the first time since all of this happened. The worst part about it, nobody has reported Teddy missing. His family hadn't called to say anything either. It's almost like none of it ever happened. Except I've got the marks around my neck, the bruises that prove I didn't imagine it. I just got a strange message from Teddy on his cell phone. He says, "See you at work tomorrow, buddy," accompanied by a mouse emoji. Me and some of the cast members have a big surprise for you.
Makes you want to go ahead and book your next vacation, doesn't it? Just stay out of the tunnels. It sounds like Main Street might be safe. Moving right along, we have another great story from Narrow Muscles 9572 about a boss that's just a little bit worse than the rest. So remember this next time you think your boss is bad.
What can I say to these people? The community center is filled with cigarette smoke. Everyone here sits in a circle of chairs to complain about their bosses, how they get called to come into work even when they're approved for time off, how they get screwed out of holiday bonuses or maternity care and more. I don't say anything when I come here. I sit quietly and listen and think about how I got where I am. When it's my turn to talk, I pass. It's not like I'm going to say these people have it easier than I do. My story started in my sophomore year of college. During that time, I didn't have many options in way of employment. The few people who were willing to work around my classes already had enough workers and weren't hiring. Thankfully, there were plenty of odd jobs listed on the cork board scattered around campus. Most of them didn't pay much and only required a few hours of your time. But the pay was better than nothing, and I'd rather eat ramen every day for a month than nothing at all. Unfortunately, lots of people were in the same boat, so all these jobs were first come, first serve. Eventually, I found one asking for a handyman. I don't know my way around tools, but I was young and dumb enough to justify that with the aid of a good YouTube tutorial, I could easily learn how to install sinks or change the oil in a car. When I arrived for my first day, my initial impression of Professor Borgenson was that he didn't look like any professor I'd ever seen. He was tall, but very thin. His hair was dark, but there was some gray at the temples, making him look older than he was. If I had to guess, he was in his early 30s. He explained that the job was easy, and the first thing I would have to do would be to remind him to eat. I found that a little funny and smiled, but he was serious. He then explained that he often gets lost in his work and forgets little things like that. When he told me the pay, I accepted the job right away. I'd begin every day by brewing his coffee in a pot, which he would serve himself. Thankfully, my classes were close, so this never interfered with my day. I'd do this again between 2 and 4 in the afternoon each day as well. The second time I went to his office, I would call restaurants and either have them deliver to him or pick up something for him to eat. In less than a week, he told me to keep the coffee coming, but he didn't need me to order food every day. After a few months, he started to tell me to do things that made me nervous. First, it was things like grabbing a file from some other office, but would escalate to picking up packages in weird and occasionally terrifying places. Before long, he had me taking chemicals out of the lab without proper paperwork. Each time I approached him about this, he would say that everything was above board, and not to worry about it. When the chem lab treated the chemicals I took as though they were stolen, I went to Borgenson and told him about it, begging him to clear this up. That was when I learned that Borgenson was using this information to blackmail me. As horrible as he wasn't completely unsympathetic to my situation, and agreed to give me my college credits if I kept doing the jobs he asked me to do. I didn't have much of a choice. At this point, he had enough information to get me expelled from school, so I continued to work for him. Besides, who would the police be more likely to believe? Me, or a man who was up for an award in excellence in laboratory science for neurological research? After that, I stole copper wire for him. He required so much that I was working on it for the better part of a month. Sometimes the buildings I stole from were being developed. Other times it was someone's house who happened to be gone for the holidays. I tried to ask him what kind of experiments he was working on, but everything I asked, he would fly into a fit of rage and frustration, complaining about how hard the work he was doing really was, and that he didn't have time to go into details because it would surely go over my head. In my junior year, he started using me as an alibi, either to get out of some kind of trouble or as an excuse so he could leave and return to his secretive experiments. Every time he'd have me meet somebody, he'd coach me on what to say to them and when to say it. I'm abruptly taken out of my thoughts when the next person in the support group starts talking. I'm only half paying attention. I'm thinking about Borgensen and staring at the same 3 triangles on the floor. I hear her say something about compensation for driving. A slight smile crept over my face when I heard this, because I wished I had that woman's problems. At least Borgensen gave me a truck and refunded me on the gas I used when I drove around, picking up the freshest roadkill I could find. During my senior year, I learned about Professor Borgensen's connections with some people in the school's zoology department. I discovered this when I actually had the official paperwork to pick up the body of howler monkeys and the body of a bonobo ape. I had been in his house a few times, but the first time I was allowed inside was right before the hurricane was about to make landfall. I thought I was called to help him prepare his house for the rain, but instead it was to do something I was not prepared for. It smelled of the same chemicals that I had stolen for him, and a coppery smell that was not unlike the scent of blood. In his upstairs bedroom was a makeshift lab, and in it was the body of a huge and hideous creature, strapped to a table and submerged in ice. It was hard to see the body, but to me it was as though he'd stitched many of them together. Borgensen was in a rush and was in no mood to answer questions. He needed to do this experiment before the storm hit, and since he still had all the blackmail material over my head, I did too. After hours of telling me to flip a switch here or press a button there, the hurricane was right on top of us. I wanted to stop, but Borgensen insisted that we keep at it, and that it was now or never. I was terrified as the gale force wind broke the windows. Borgensen had to yell over it for me to hear his instructions, but eventually he gave this creature a pulse. Since we were on the 2nd floor and the hurricane was tearing the house apart all around us, we had to bring this unconscious body down to the main floor, where Borgensen had converted a small room into a cage. Borgensen and I were barely able to get to the basement by the time the hurricane tore the house apart. As the water rose and the violent sound of wind filled my ears, I prayed that I would get out of this. Borgensen, on the other hand, was only concerned about the thing he had created. When it was all over and the hurricane had passed, we discovered the body of the creature had been crushed and died. There is supportive clapping when the last speaker is done telling their story. I clap along, and when it's the next person's turn to speak, I keep my chin on my chest and return to my thoughts. The next person complains about unpaid wages, but I can't relate to that. Borgensen was many things, but he was not a wage thief, and paid me for everything I'd done. Disgruntled by the loss of his creature, Borgensen left me alone, and I was able to focus on my studies. The rare times I saw him were when I prepared his coffee. It was during one of these times that He told me that since I was a senior and wouldn't be around forever, he was searching for a new assistant. After telling me this, he solemnly shook his head and gave me my last payment with a generous bonus, especially for someone with my financial situation. I couldn't have been happier, not because of the money, but because I was finally free of the man who I learned to hate with every fiber of my being. I would soon graduate and move back to my hometown, where I would spend 10 years repressing the memories of Professor Borgenson. A man in the group who goes by Barry is the next to speak. He complains about his boss calling him into work on pre-approved days off. I feel for him. In a weird way, I can relate. Thought I was done with Borgenson, but then one night a stranger comes to Moe's bar, my place of employment. He seems friendly, and even though he didn't look familiar, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of what I'd seen in the mirror after a night doing Borgenson's bidding. Once the barflies started making their way out, the stranger confessed that he was the newest assistant to Borgenson, and the only reason he was at the bar was because Borgenson was in town and needed my help. I refused, but when the stranger told me that Borgenson still had the blackmail material, and if I didn't come along, he was going to use it against me. When Barry wraps up his story, everyone claps, and it snaps me out of my memories and returns me to the present. It's my turn to speak. I've been coming to the support group for a long time, but I've never said more than 2 words. After all, what can I say? That if I could, I'd trade my position with any of these people. That they should get on their knees and thank their lucky stars for not having bosses that blackmail them. That Borgenson still forces me to do things for him, like stealing bodies from the morgue. There's only one answer I can come up with. Pass.
One more story, and I promise I've saved the best for last. Coming to us from an old friend, gone from the charts, but not from our hearts. This is one from Society Menace, CC, about a fellow who sells life insurance and has a very strange client that perhaps does a little more than just put his name on the dotted line. So let's hear about the life of a life insurance agent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I shuffled through the stacks of applications on my desk. Another day, another pile of desperate people hoping to secure some fragment of security in an uncertain world. I'd been working at Everlast Life Insurance for over a decade, and the faces all kind of blurred together after a while. Young families, middle-aged divorcees, elderly folks grasping at one last chance to leave something behind. I'd seen it all. Or so I thought. It was late on a Friday afternoon when his file crossed my desk. Most of my co-workers had already left for the weekend, their vacant cubicles forming a maze of shadows in the dimming office. I should have been out the door myself, but something made me pause as I reached for my coat. Maybe it was the worn edges of the manila folder, or the faded photograph paperclipped to the front. Whatever it was, I found myself sinking back into my chair, flipping open the files of Mr. Ezekiel Thorne. The photo showed a withered old man, his skin like crumpled parchment, stretched over sharp bones. But it was his eyes that gave me pause. Pale blue and piercing, they seemed to stare right through the camera and into my soul. I shivered involuntarily and turned to the application itself. Ezekiel Thorne, age 92, no living relatives, former occupation, mortician, current address, 13 Ravens Lane. As I scanned his medical history, my eyebrows steadily crept higher. This man should have been dead 10 times over. Heart attacks, cancer, strokes, he'd survived it all. Now here he was, the ripe old age of 92,
applying for a substantial life insurance policy. I'll admit, a small part of me was impressed. The old codger had beaten the odds time and time again, but the larger part, the part that had kept me employed at Everlast for all these years, saw only dollar signs and risk. There was no way the company would approve this. The potential payout far outweighed any premium that we could charge. So with a sigh, I reached for the large red denied stamp. It was just business, after all. It wasn't personal. As the stamp came down with a dull thud, a chill ran down my spine. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw those pale blue eyes staring at me from the shadow of my cubicle. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty office and the ever-present hum of the fluorescent lights. Get it together, I told myself. You're working too late. It's time to go home. I hurriedly shoved Mr. Thorne's file into the outgoing mail and grabbed my coat. As I rushed out the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The weight of that gaze seemed to follow me all the way to my car. That night I dreamed of pale blue eyes and the smell of formaldehyde. The next week passed in a blur of routine. I processed applications, attended meetings, did my best to forget about Ezekiel Thorne, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the lingering unease that had taken root in the pit of my stomach. It was exactly 1 week later when I heard the news. I was in the break room, pouring my third cup of coffee, when I overheard 2 coworkers gossiping by the vending machine. "Did you hear about that old man who died last night? The one who lived in that creepy house on Ravens Lane?" I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. "Oh yeah, what was his name? Thornton or Thorne?" "Ezekiel Thorne," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My coworkers turned to look at me, startled. "Yeah, that's it. Did you know him?" I couldn't answer. The room was spinning, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. I mumbled some excuse and stumbled back to my cubicle, collapsing into my chair. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. Old people die all the time. It had nothing to do with me or the denied application. But as I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't help but remember those piercing blue eyes. And I could have sworn I caught a whiff of formaldehyde drifting through the recycled office air. That night I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Thorne's wrinkled face, his eyes accusing and full of malice. When I finally drifted off in the early hours of the morning, my dreams were haunted by the sound of a pen scratching endlessly across paper, filling out an application that would never be approved. I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I realized with growing horror that the scratching sound hadn't stopped. It was coming from outside my bedroom door. Trembling, I reached for the bedside lamp. As the light flooded the room, the scratching abruptly ceased. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement from the hallway beyond. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, something slid under my door. A manila folder, its edges worn and familiar. With shaking hands, I picked it up, opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in spidery handwriting, were the words, "Life insurance application." The rest of the page was blank, save for 2 words stamped at the bottom. "Claim denied." I let out a strangled cry and threw the folder across the room. This couldn't be happening. This was a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. When I opened them again, the folder was gone, but the faint smell of formaldehyde lingered in the air, and I knew with sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face the office, couldn't bear to look at another insurance application. Spent the day huddled in my apartment, jumping at every creak and shadow. By nightfall, I had almost convinced myself that it had all been my imagination. Almost. As darkness fell, I found myself drawn to my computer. With trembling fingers, I typed Ezekiel Thorne into the search bar. What I found chilled me to the bone. The first result was an obituary, dated 2 days ago. But it wasn't the date that caught my attention. It was the photo. The man in the photo was undoubtedly Ezekiel Thorne, but he looked wrong. His skin was waxy, his posture too stiff, and his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had haunted my dreams, were open, staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. That couldn't be right. No funeral home would publish a photo like that. Would they? A soft thud from the hallway made me jump. I froze, listening intently. Another thud, closer this time. Then another. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps, approaching my door. I held my breath, praying it was just a neighbor. The footsteps stopped right outside my apartment. For a long time, there was only silence. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps that seemed to echo through my entire body. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Maybe if I played perfectly still, whoever or whatever was out there would just go away. Another knock, louder this time. Then a voice, dry and raspy, like dead leaves, skittering across the pavement.
I know you're there, Mr. Insurance Man. We have unfinished business.
I bit back a scream. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening.
You denied my claim,
the voice continued, seeping under my door like a noxious gas.
but I'm not finished yet. Not by a long shot.
The doorknob began to turn, metal scraping against metal. I watched in terror as it slowly rotated, defying the deadbolt that I knew was securely in place. Just as the door began to creak open, I snapped out of my paralysis. I ran to my bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I could hear shuffling footsteps in the living room, getting closer.
You can't hide from death forever,
the voice called out, now just outside the bedroom door.
Sooner or later, someone's policy comes due.
I blinked, backing away from the door, looking wildly around for an escape route. The window caught my eye. I was only on the 3rd floor. I could make that jump. I had to. The bedroom doorknob began to turn. I didn't hesitate. I flung open the window and climbed out onto the narrow ledge. The cool night air hit me like a slap, clearing some of the panic from my mind. What was I doing? This was insane. I was 3 stories up, clinging to the side of a building, because I thought a dead man was trying to get into my apartment. I slowly turned back towards the window, ready to climb back inside and face whatever madness awaited me. But as I peered through the glass, my blood ran cold. Ezekiel Thorne stood in my bedroom, his pale blue eyes locked onto mine. His skin was gray and mottled, his suit the same one he'd been buried in. As I watched in horror, he raised one withered hand and beckoned to me. I lost my balance, my foot slipping off the ledge. For one heart-stopping moment, I teetered on the edge of oblivion. Then I was falling, the ground rushing up to meet me. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Multiple fractures. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive.
As I lay there trying to piece together what had happened, a nurse came in with a small package. "This was left for you at the front desk," she said, placing it on my bedside table. With a sense of dread, I opened the package. Inside was a life insurance policy from Everlast. My own company had apparently taken out a policy on me without my knowledge. There at the bottom of the page was a familiar red stamp. Claim denied. I started to laugh, the sound bordering on hysterics. The nurse looked at me with concern, but I couldn't stop, because there in the corner of the room I could see a pair of pale blue eyes watching me from the shadow. This was far from over. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital rooms and physical therapy. I told myself that what I'd experienced was just a vivid hallucination brought on by the stress and lack of sleep. The fall from my window, a moment of sleepwalking, nothing more. I almost believed it. But every night, as the hospital grew quiet and the shadows lengthened, I could feel those eyes on me. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a withered figure at the end of the hallway, or hear the shuffle of feet outside my door. The night staff whispered about the smell of formaldehyde that seemed to linger in my room, no matter how much they cleaned it. I was released from the hospital on a gray, drizzly Tuesday. As the taxi pulled up at my apartment, I felt a surge of panic. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't face those eyes, the room where I'd seen him. "Keep driving," I told the cabbie, giving him the address of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. That night, as I lay in the lumpy motel bed, I finally allowed myself to think about what had happened. If Ezekiel Thorne was really dead, and I'd seen his obituary, hadn't I, then how could he be haunting me? And why? 'Cause I'd denied his life insurance application? It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. A soft knock at the door made me jump. I held my breath, waiting. It came again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Life Insurance Man," that dry, raspy voice called out again. "You can't run forever. Your policy is coming due." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not again. The doorknob began to turn. I scrambled out of bed, looking frantically for an escape route. The bathroom window was small, but I was desperate enough to try squeezing through it. As I rushed towards the bathroom, the motel room door creaked open behind me. The smell hit me first, a nauseating mixture of formaldehyde and decay. I slammed the bathroom door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the simple task. The shuffling footsteps grew closer. Now, Ezekiel's voice rasped just outside the bathroom door. "Is that any way to treat a client? We have a policy to discuss." I turned on the faucet full blast, hoping to drown out his words. Somehow his voice cut through the rush of water, clear as a bell, though. "You denied me a life, Mr. Insurance Man, but death is a much more accommodating underwriter." The doorknob rattled. I backed away, pressing myself against the small window. It was stuck, decades of paint sealing it shut. I clawed at it, desperate, fingernails breaking as I tried to force it open. A bony hand burst through the door, splintering wood as if it were paper. I screamed, a sound of pure terror that I barely recognized as my own. My hands groped around, finding the lock and turning it with a decisive click. The door swung open. I finally managed to break the seal on the window. I didn't even bother to clear away the broken glass before I started to squeeze through the tiny opening. The shards slashed at my skin, but I barely felt the pain. All I could focus on was my escape. I tumbled out onto the wet pavement of the motel's back alley, the rain soaking me instantly. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not daring to look back. I ran and ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing in a park several miles away. As I sat there gasping for breath, shivering in the cold rain, I tried to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't go on. I couldn't keep running forever. There had to be a way to end this, to appease the spirit of Ezekiel Thorne. With a sudden clarity, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I dragged myself into Everlast Insurance office. My colleagues stared as I limped past, clothes torn and stained, face gaunt with exhaustion and fear. I ignored them all, making my way straight to the records room. It took me hours of searching, but I finally found what I was looking for. Ezekiel Thorne's original application. With shaking hands, I pulled out a pen and changed the denied stamp to approved. I filled out the necessary paperwork, backdating it to before his death. As I signed the final form, I felt a chill run down my spine. Slowly, I turned around. Ezekiel Thorne stood there, a grotesque smile stretching his decaying face.
"Well done, Mr. Insurance Man, but I'm afraid it's too late for that."
I blinked, and suddenly I was back in my apartment, sitting at my desk. The insurance papers were gone. In their place was a single document. My own death certificate, dated today.
"You see, your policies come due the moment you denied mine. Everything since then, that was just a grace period."
I felt a bony hand on my shoulder, and the world began to fade away. I woke up screaming, tangled in sheets, soaked in sweat. My heart was racing, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. As reality slowly seeped back in, I realized I was in my own bed, in my own apartment. It had all been a nightmare, a vivid, terrifying dream, but a nightmare nonetheless. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by embarrassment. How could I have let a simple insurance application affect me so deeply? I glanced at the clock. It was 3:07 in the morning. With a sigh, I got up to get a glass of water, hoping it would calm my nerves. The hallway was empty, shadows stretching in the dim light. I let out a shaky laugh. Get a grip, I told myself. It was just a dream. I turned back towards the kitchen, found myself face to face with Ezekiel Thorne. His pale blue eyes bored into mine, his withered face inches from my own. The smell of formaldehyde was overwhelming.
"Sweet dreams, Mr. Insurance Man," he rasped.
Then with a bony finger he reached out and tapped me on the forehead. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My bedroom was dark and quiet. No sign of any undead visitors. Just another nightmare, but as I reached up to wipe the sweat from my brow, my blood ran cold. There in the center of my forehead, I felt a small cold spot, exactly where Ezekiel's finger had touched me in my dream. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the bathroom, flipping on the lights. In the mirror, I saw a small, perfectly round bruise forming on my forehead. As I stared at it in horror, I could have sworn I saw pale eyes reflecting in the mirror behind me. I whirled around, but the bathroom was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the eyes were gone, but the bruise remained, a tangible reminder that the lines between nightmare and reality had blurred. From that night on, sleep became the enemy. Every time I closed my eyes, Ezekiel was waiting. Sometimes he chased me through the endless twisting corridors. Other times he simply stood and watched, those pale blue eyes never blinking. Always I woke up to new bruises, scratches, or other inexplicable marks. During the day I was a wreck. I couldn't focus on work. I jumped at every sound and seeing Ezekiel's face in every shadow. My colleagues whispered behind my back, their concerned looks following me as I stumbled through the office like a ghost. I knew I was losing grips with reality, but what could I do? Who would believe me if I told them I was being haunted by the ghost of a man whose life insurance policy I denied? As weeks passed, I grew gaunt and hollow-eyed, the boundaries between waking and sleeping, reality and nightmares becoming increasingly blurred. I would find myself in strange places with no memories of how I'd got there, standing on the roof of my apartment building or in the middle of a graveyard across town. As always, I felt those blue eyes watching me. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to give. In desperation, I decided to confront the source of my torment. I would go to Ezekiel Thorne's grave and what? Apologize? Beg for forgiveness? I didn't know, but I had to do something. The cemetery was eerily quiet as I made my way through the rows of headstones. The sun was setting, casting long shadows along the ground. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter around me. Finally, I found it. A simple granite headstone with the name Ezekiel Thorne carved into it. Below that was the date of his birth and his death, and at the bottom there was a single line. His claim was denied, but his spirit endures. I stood there, staring at those words as darkness fell around me. What was I doing here? What did I hope to accomplish? "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling foolish but desperate. "I'm sorry I denied your application. I was just doing my job. Please, just leave me alone." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of nearby trees. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper on the breeze.
"Too late, Mr. Insurance Man. Far too late."
I turned to leave, my heart heavy with the realization that this had all been for nothing. But as I took a step away from the grave, the ground beneath my feet suddenly gave way. I fell, tumbling into darkness. The smell of damp earth filled my nostrils as I landed hard on something solid. As I lay there, winded and disoriented, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The scrape of wood on wood, like a coffin lid being slowly opened. A bony hand emerged from the darkness, gripping my ankle. I was dragged deeper into the earth. The last thing I saw, a pair of pale blue eyes, gleaming with triumph.
"Welcome,"
Ezekiel's raspy voice echoed around me,
"to your eternal policy, Mr. Insurance Man. I'm afraid the premiums are quite steep, but don't worry. We have all eternity to settle accounts."
The darkness closed in, and I knew that my claim on life had finally been denied. I jolted awake, my heart pounding so hard that I thought it might burst from my chest. The familiar surroundings of my bedroom slowly came into focus. Bathed in the soft glow of early morning light, I was drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs like a burial shroud. For a moment, relief washed over me. It had all been a dream, a horrifically vivid nightmare, but a dream nonetheless. I let out an exhausted laugh, running my hands through my hair. I stumbled out of bed, my legs weak and unsteady. The world seemed to tilt and swim around me as I made my way to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering tendrils of my nightmare. But when I looked into the mirror, my blood ran cold. There, reflected in the glass behind me, were a pair of pale blue eyes. I whirled around, my heart in my throat, but the bathroom was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, they were gone again. I called in sick that day, unable to face the thought of dealing with more insurance claims. Instead, I spent hours researching hauntings, exorcisms, anything that might help me understand what was happening. But the more I read, the more helpless I felt. How could I fight something that shouldn't even exist? As night fell, I found myself dreading sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Ezekiel's withered face, those pale blue eyes boring into my soul. I tried everything to stay awake. Coffee, energy drinks, even slapping myself across the face. But eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off into an uneasy slumber. The dream started as it always did. I was back at Everlast Insurance, Ezekiel's file open on my desk. This time, as I reached for the denied stamp, I hesitated. What if I approved it? Would that end the nightmares? With a trembling hand, I picked up the approved stamp instead. As it came down on the paper, I felt a rush of relief. Maybe now it would be over. But as I looked up, Ezekiel was there, his decaying face inches from mine.
"Too late, Mr. Insurance Man," he rasped. "Your policy has already been cashed in."
I woke up, screaming, thrashing against the sheets. As I fought to catch my breath, I realized something was different. The room smelled wrong, like formaldehyde and decay. I slowly turned my head towards the bedroom door. It was open. Standing in the doorway was a figure that I had hoped never to see in the waking world. Ezekiel Thorne shuffled into the room, his movements stiff and unnatural. In the dim light, I could see the waxy sheen of his skin, the sunken hollow of his cheeks, but it was the eyes that had me paralyzed. Those pale blue orbs, now cloudy with death, but still piercing in their intensity.
"Did you really think it would be that easy?"
he wheezed, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement.
"That you could simply stamp approved and wash your hands of me?"
I tried to speak, to plead, to reason with him, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't respond, pinned to the bed by an unseen force. Ezekiel reached the side of the bed, looming over me.
"You denied me in life, Mr. Insurance Man, but death is far more lenient, and now it's time to collect on your policy."
He reached out a bony hand, his fingers pointing directly at my forehead. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for whatever was to come. But the touch never came. Instead, I heard a sound that did not belong. The shrill ring of a telephone. My eyes snapped open. I was alone in my bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows. The phone on my nightstand continued to ring insistently. With a shaking hand, I picked it up. "Hello? Mr. Johnson," it was my boss's voice. "Where are you? You were supposed to be here an hour ago for the meeting with the new client." I glanced at the clock and cursed. I had overslept. "I'm sorry. I'll be right there," I stammered, already scrambling out of bed. As I rushed to get ready, my mind was reeling. Had it all been a dream? But the bruise on my forehead was still there, faded but visible. I made it to the office in record time, sliding into the conference room just as the meeting was starting. As I took my seat, trying to catch my breath, I froze. Sitting across the table, his pale blue eyes locked on mine, was Ezekiel Thorne. He looked different in the harsh fluorescent lights of the office. less corpse-like, more human, but there was no mistaking those eyes. "Mr. Johnson, I'd like you to meet our new client, Mr. Thorne. He's interested in a rather unique life insurance policy." Ezekiel's lips curled into a small smile.
"It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Insurance Man," he said, his voice dry but devoid of the otherworldly rasp I had come to associate with him. "I have a feeling we're going to be working very closely together."
As he reached across the table to shake my hand, I saw the glint of triumph in those pale blue eyes. I knew with sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The meeting passed in a blur. I nodded and smiled automatically, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. How could Ezekiel be here, alive and well, when I'd seen his obituary, when he had haunted my dreams and invaded my waking hours as a decaying corpse? As the other attendees filed out of the room, Ezekiel lingered. He approached me slowly, his movements fluid and natural, nothing like the stiff, shuffling gait of the creature that had haunted me.
"Quite a shock, isn't it, Mr. Johnson?" he said,
softly, his pale blue eyes never leaving mine.
"To see a dead man among the living."
I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I don't understand. You were... I saw you." Ezekiel's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a shade too white, too perfect.
"Death is not always as final as people believe, especially for those of us who have certain connections."
He leaned in closer, and I caught a whiff of that familiar formaldehyde scent.
"You denied my claim once, Mr. Insurance Man, but now I'm offering you a policy of your own, one that will guarantee your safety and sanity."
What do you want?" I whispered, unable to look away from those hypnotic blue eyes.
"It's simple, really. You'll be my personal insurance agent from now on. Every policy I bring you, you'll approve, no questions asked. In return, I'll ensure that your nights are peaceful, and your days, well, let's just say you won't have to worry about any unexpected visits."
I knew I should refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, but the memories of those endless nightmares, the constant fear and paranoia, it was all too fresh.
"Do we have a deal, Mr. Insurance Man?"
Ezekiel extended his hand, his pale blue eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. With a sense of finality, I reached out and shook his hand. His skin was cold and dry, like old parchment.
"Excellent," Ezekiel said,
his smile growing impossibly wide.
"I look forward to a long and profitable relationship."
As he turned to leave, he paused at the door.
"Oh, and Mr. Johnson, sweet dreams."
That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares. But as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed away something far more valuable than any insurance policy. And in the shadows of my room, I could have sworn I saw a pair of pale blue eyes watching, waiting, as I descended into dreamless sleep. The weeks that followed were a blur of surreal normalcy. By day, I went through the motions at work, approving every policy that crossed my desk with Ezekiel's name attached. They were always for astronomical sums, always for clients with medical histories that should have disqualified them immediately. But I stamped each one approved without hesitation, the memory of those nightmarish weeks still fresh in my mind. By night, I slept peacefully, undisturbed by visions of decay and whispers of eternity. But the price of this tranquility weighed heavily on my conscience. As the months wore on, I began to notice changes in myself. My reflection in the mirror looked older, somehow. Gaunt. There were more streaks of gray in my hair that hadn't been there before. It was as if Ezekiel was slowly draining the life from me, one approved policy at a time. It was nearly a year to the day since I made my deal with him, before he called me into his office. Yes, he had an office now, a corner suite with a view of the city. As I entered, I noticed the smell of formaldehyde was stronger than ever.
"Ah, Mr. Johnson," he said, his pale blue eyes gleaming. "I have a special policy for you today, one I think you'll find particularly interesting."
He slid a folder across the desk. With a trembling hand, I opened it. Inside was a life insurance application. My life insurance application. As the meaning of his words sank in, I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading all along. Ezekiel had never intended to let me go. He was going to claim me, just as he'd claimed all those other poor souls whose policy I'd approved. But in that moment of terror, something inside me snapped. I'd spent my whole career assessing risks, calculating odds, and suddenly I realized Ezekiel's power over me was built on fear. Fear that I'd given him willingly. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Ezekiel's smile faltered.
"I beg your pardon."
I stood up, looking him directly in those pale eyes. I said no. This wasn't part of our deal, and I'm done being afraid of you. For a moment, Ezekiel's facade slipped, revealing the decaying horror beneath. But I held my ground. "You have no power over me," I continued, my confidence growing. "You're nothing but a parasite, feeding on fear and bureaucracy, while I'm cutting you off." I grabbed the file with my application in it and tore it in half. As the pieces fell to the floor, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. Ezekiel let out an inhuman shriek, lunging across the desk at me. But his movements were slow, clumsy, as if he were struggling to maintain his form in our world. I dodged his grasping hands and ran for the door. As I threw it open, I shouted to the stunned office, "Everyone listen! Don't approve any more of his policies. He has no power if we don't give it to him." Chaos erupted in the office. Some people screamed, others looked confused, but I saw understanding dawn in a few faces. Those who, like me, had been haunted by nightmares of pale blue eyes and the smell of formaldehyde. As I ran through the building, shouting my warning, I heard Ezekiel's enraged howls behind me. But with each person who listened, each policy that was questioned instead of blindly approved, his voice grew fainter. I burst out of the building, into the sunlight, gasping for breath. For a moment, I thought I saw Ezekiel's withered face in the reflection of a nearby window, those pale blue eyes filled with impotent rage. But then it was gone, fading like a bad dream in the morning light. In the days that followed, there was an investigation. Hundreds of fraudulent policies were uncovered, all traced back to the mysterious Ezekiel Thorne, who seemed to have vanished into thin air. The company underwent a major overhaul, with a new emphasis on ethical practices and thorough vetting. As for me, I slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like years. The nightmares were gone, banished along with the specter of Ezekiel Thorne. I'd learned a valuable lesson about the power of facing your fears and the importance of reading the fine print. Sometimes on dark nights, I think I catch a whiff of formaldehyde or see a flash of pale blue eyes in the shadows. But I'm not afraid anymore. After all, I know the truth now. No ghost, no matter how malevolent or cunning, can stand against the power of human will and a properly denied insurance claim. And just like that, our stories are at an end once again. But don't worry, I'll be back very soon with more great tales and more great time spent with you. Till next time, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.